Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining the webinar. My name is Emily Morgan, and I'm Senior Policy Analyst with the Council of State Governments Justice Center. And before getting started, we wanted to talk briefly through a few housekeeping items about how the webinar is going to work, and then tell you a little bit about the CSG Justice Center. Anytime during this webinar, you can ask questions by typing it into the Q&A panel at the bottom right-hand portion of your screen. We will keep a running list of content-related questions that we receive, and then we'll ask the panelists to respond to questions during the last segment of the webinar. We'll do our best to get through as many questions as possible. If you encounter any technical or audio problems during the webinar, please call WebEx Technical Support at 1-866-229-3239. And please understand that there are some technical issues you may not be able to resolve. For this reason, we are recording this event and we'll post it on our website at csgjusticecenter.org next week. We should have the webinar posted online early next week, and once it's posted, we will email you a link of the recording. So thank you again for participating in our webinar today, focused on the School Discipline Consensus Report, Strategies from the Field to Keep Students Engaged in School and Out of the Juvenile Justice System. We are really excited about our lineup today and wanted to run through quickly the agenda before turning it over to some of our speakers and running through the report a little bit further. We're going to start out with some introductions of some of our key partners from the National Association of Secondary School Principals, the American Federation of Teachers, the National Education Association, and then go through an overview of the School Discipline Consensus Report, which was released this past June. We're also going to hear from Principal Killian Betlatch from Elmhurst Community Prep School in Oakland, California, to provide an on-the-ground perspective of how he is handling school discipline reform in his community. And then we're going to open up to discussion from the group. So to provide a quick overview, I wanted to turn it over first to Beverly Hutton, Director of Professional Development for the National Association of Secondary School Principals. Beverly?
Good afternoon. My name is Beverly Hudson, and I am the Director of Professional Development and Strategic Partnerships for the National Association of Secondary School Principals. Let me just first give a little bit of background about us so you can see why we're tied in to this project. The National Association of Secondary School Principals represents the 95,000 school leaders across this nation, but specifically our 23,000 members. And we are committed to having great leaders in every school, committed to the success of each student, and we fulfill that vision by connecting and engaging our members through advocacy, education, research, and student programs. That many people are not aware of this, but NASSP is the parent organization of the National Honor Society and the National Association of Student Councils. And so we are invested in the provision of quality education experiences in America's schools. So the schooling experience should be good for all students. Our belief is that each student in the school environment should be known and valued. And our Breaking Ranks framework for school reform has 3 cornerstones. Collaborative leadership is one, curriculum assessment and instruction is the other, and personalization is the third. So our commitment to each student thriving in an environment where personalization is the norm is why we signed on to participate and support the School Discipline Consensus Project. We believe that culture and climate of the school is under the direct influence of the school leader or the principal. And NASSP is committed to providing programs and services to our members to help them stay on the cutting edge of the best leadership practices, to put students in the best position to succeed and be college and career ready. So that can only occur when principals and parents and teachers are working together to create and nurture a school community that is fair and equitable and a school community where personalization is a pivotal hallmark of the education experience. So principals honoring the work of teachers, teachers nurturing the minds of students, and students respecting the individuality of each other is what we are advocating for. That is the epitome of personalization. There are several significant factors that contribute to a personalized school climate and culture. And among them are a welcoming environment encouraged through the strategic leadership of a school principal. The other is an enthusiastic and well-prepared teaching force who provide high-quality teaching and learning experiences for students and who are culturally competent. The other is opportunities for students to participate in extracurricular activities and develop the whole child. And then fourth, and certainly not in order, but school discipline policies and practices that are fair and equitable toward each student. The statistics, as I'm sure you all know, are quite clear that our school disciplinary practices do not necessarily acknowledge the unique needs and attributes of each student. And unilateral policies such as zero tolerance or the blanketed imposition of discipline practices have negatively affected students, particularly students of color, and specifically African American males. So all of us in the education space need to take a hard look at those statistics, and we must make a commitment to lead schools where disciplinary practices and policies acknowledge the disparities. And that commitment should also ensure that our schools, I would say, deliberately and strategically address ways to eliminate those disparities. So this issue has both immediate and long-reaching effects on our children and their parents and our society as a whole. Every child, every person deserves to be known and valued, respected and regarded, and the eradication of policies and practices that perpetuate either the mistreatment or the disregard of any group or person or segment of our population must be a priority for us as school leaders because it's simply unacceptable. So NASFP develops and supports great leaders in every school who are committed to the success of each student, and we therefore completely support the work of the School Discipline Consensus Project. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Beverly, and thank you so much for your leadership and involvement in the project. We really appreciate it. Next, I wanted to introduce Lisa Thomas, the Assistant Director for Educational Issues at the American Federation of Teachers.
Good afternoon, everyone. I want to first and foremost thank Emily and Mike Thompson and all the wonderful staff at the Council of State Governments for bringing together the diverse but necessary constituents that have supported and participated in the development of this guide and report. And we certainly here at AFT are really excited to support this work even further by disseminating it through our networks and connecting our leaders to this work. And like Beverly, I echo our sentiments on behalf of President Randy Weingarten and our Vice President Mary Catherine Ricker, as well as Dr. Loretta Johnson, that this work ties into our initiative to reclaim the promise of American education, public education in America, rather. And part of that work will be done through connecting this to Reclaiming the Promise. There are two elements to our initiative under Reclaiming the Promise that we seek to address and redress. As you know, AFT has up until fairly recently not had a uniform policy on school discipline and school discipline reform. And we, like Beverly and the Association of School Principals, we look closely at the data. We've looked closely at the reports that have been coming out. We've had conversations with leaders from the field, recognizing that we too have a responsibility and shared goal of improving outcomes for children, and if they are not in school, they cannot learn. And so with that in mind, we looked fast and hard at the data and looked at our existing initiatives and frameworks, and we arrived at that this is part of reclaiming the promise of public education in America. And so 2 key elements of our program is welcoming spaces for teaching and learning, and as well as creating learning environments where children and their families have access to critical services. And part of those critical services is sound instruction, engaging curriculum, and safe and welcoming environments where students' physical, emotional, and mental health safety is highly regarded and met in our school settings. And so that being said, we too support the recommendations from the policies that were arrived in the school census report, and we will continue to work with CSG to promote those through a variety of forums, not just in our hard and media and electronic forums, but also connecting with leaders, looking at our professional development programs and our existing professional development programs, and making sure that the policy recommendations are in alignment with those in the CSG reports. As we all know, that sometimes implementation takes on a life of its own, and so we're really excited at the comprehensive way in which constituents from various stakeholder groups have coalesced in more or less a consensus format to support the recommendations, and we look forward to continuing to strengthen the implementation process and as well as learn from it and improve on it. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Lisa, and just to underscore, you and AFT have been such an important part of this project, and we really are excited to be continuing to work with you to push this work forward. And our third introduction will be provided by Harry Lawson, the Assistant Director for Human and Civil Rights at the National Education Association.
Well, thanks, Emily. Hello, everyone. This is Harry Lawson, as you mentioned, Associate Director of Human and Civil Rights Department here at NEA. And I echo sentiments of the previous speakers in terms of CSG pulling such a diverse group of practitioners and leaders from various constituency groups to really talk through some sound recommendations and come to some consensus about how we decrease and have impact on the disparities related to school discipline policy across the country. And we support and will continue to support the report's findings, and we are trying to work closely with CSG to provide opportunities for them to talk directly to our leaders and members about the report, to put before them these recommendations so that they can take them home and use them in the discussions that they have with leadership in their individual work sites, as well as in those places where they have sound relationships with the districts, to really talk through how they can make changes to school discipline policy. In terms of what we've been doing in addition to that, much like AFT, I mean, we've really had to take an internal look at some of our own policy internally based on our review of the data and what the data has been telling us over the years, that we really, if we're going to have a student-centered agenda and really be supportive of student success and academic success, and if we're going to operate from a position that every student needs to have a safe environment, safe climate, and afforded the opportunity to be successful, we really had to take a step back about what our positions are and where we are, and we think we've done that. We've really tried to manage over this past year and a half, make a concerted effort to make sure that we are creating better awareness amongst our members about the impact of school discipline policy and the disparities that exist. And we think we've accomplished that, and we're trying to now expand our reach with our professional development programs that include cultural competence, ELL advocacy, bullying prevention, among other things that all contribute to having the kind of safe climate and safe environments for both educators and students. We're also looking to find ways to better prepare educators to implement some of the recommendations that exist in terms of programmatic work that they can do at the local level or in their particular classrooms or workspaces, to have impact on climate, and we will continue to look for other opportunities to do that. Creating equitable and safe spaces is our new leadership team, Lily Eskelson-Garcia and Becky Pringle, Princess Moss, have made it. They're going to champion these issues related to equity and how we manage that. And so everything that we do at this point is really with a student-centered focus and how we can create the right kinds of spaces for all students, no matter the socioeconomic status, race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, or whether or not they are experiencing other challenges, that they all have equal opportunity to succeed in the classroom and in public schools. And so this report, among some of the other work we've done in partnership with CSG as well as AFT, we've been working pretty closely with Lisa Thomas on this issue, which is actually refreshing that the two unions have been working together on it. And I think it sends a great message to our members about the importance of this issue, and we'll continue to do that going forward. So we're excited about the report and what it brings to the table in light of the guidance from DOE and DOJ, as well as other data that has come out over the past year. And all of it together creates a real opportunity for us to make some real systemic change in support of students.
Great. Thanks so much, Harry, and thanks to all three of you and your organizations. As you know, educators and administrators have been such a critical part of the Consensus Project and the report, and we really appreciate your help in making sure their perspectives were reflected in the recommendations. So now we want to turn to the issue at hand, the School Discipline Consensus Report, which was released in June of this year. And want to kind of provide you a little bit of background on the report and then also delve into some of the recommendations and particularly highlight strategies that are of interest and that can be employed at the school level. So to give you a quick overview of the Justice Center, we're a national nonprofit organization that serves policymakers at the local, state, and federal level from all three branches of government. And we provide practical, nonpartisan advice and evidence-based, consensus-driven strategies to increase public safety and strengthen communities. Our work primarily focuses on criminal and juvenile justice issues and how those systems intersect with other disciplines such as public health and education. And that's really how we became interested in the issue of school discipline. So from our juvenile justice work, we were finding that many youth were coming into contact with the system as a result of suspension and expulsion. And so we set out to better understand why. As you likely know, the numbers of students removed from school for disciplinary reasons is staggering. Millions of students are suspended nationally for minor misconduct, and estimates from the 2009-2010 school year show that 3 million students were suspended in school and 3.3 million students were suspended out of school that school year. And as we know, suspension puts youth at greater risk of falling behind academically, dropping out, and becoming involved in the juvenile justice system. To drill down deeper on these national numbers, the Justice Center, in partnership with Texas A&M University, conducted a landmark study in Texas that examined education and juvenile justice records of all 7th grade students, which was approximately or nearly 1 million students, and tracked them over a 6-year period. And findings showed that nearly 60% of all students during that study period were suspended at least once, and that this wasn't an unusual experience for many of them. 15% of students were disciplined 11 or more separate times. And this begs the question that if suspensions aren't working on the 5th, 6th, 7th time, what makes you think that their behavior is going to change on the 11th or 12th time? So clearly there's a need to explore alternative strategies. The findings in Texas also mirrored national numbers, which show that youth of color are disproportionately suspended. And here you can see that disproportionality has always existed or existed for several decades, but that it's expanded in recent years. And black males in particular are much more likely to be suspended than their white peers. So that said, even if you're not immediately drawn to this issue by the data presented here, why, given all of the other priorities facing schools today, should this be something that we need to focus on? As we know, there are so many efforts dedicated at the moment towards improving school safety and ensuring students feel welcome and supported in their learning environment. And in order to do so, there needs to be a focus on school discipline. Similarly, if we're going to close the achievement gap between white students and students of color, those students that are disproportionately disciplined, we really need to be examining our school disciplinary policies and practices. If we want to improve high school graduation rates and ensure kids stay in school through graduation and beyond, we need to examine the types and the numbers of students that were being pushed out of school through disciplinary means. And if we want to reduce the number of youth who are locked up in juvenile correctional facilities, particularly those for minor offenses, we really need to be looking at that pipeline that often takes kids from schools into the juvenile justice system. And as you can see, this is an issue that's being incorporated into the priorities of policymakers everywhere. And to underscore that this is something that has national momentum, we've highlighted some activity occurring across the country in the last couple of years. So from this map, you can see that over a dozen big city school districts have overhauled their codes of conduct. Similarly, upwards of 8 states passed legislation in the last legislative session to improve school discipline. And 13 states have statutes directing schools to improve school climate. And in addition, there's activity at the federal level. Following the release of the Breaking Schools Rules report in 2011, the U.S. Department of Justice and Education announced the launch of the Joint Agency Supportive School Discipline Initiative. And there's good news. We're seeing progress. For example, in New York City, we're seeing a 27% reduction in suspensions over the past few years. But as many and most places will tell you, there's a lot of work still to be done. And even if suspensions are decreasing, disproportionality remains. So it's clear that there's a lot of momentum around this issue. And what we're really excited today is to talk to you about a groundbreaking new resource that represents consensus on the types of strategies that need to be adopted in order to make additional headway in this area. So what's special about the School Discipline Consensus Report? First of all, it's field-driven. So it doesn't come from an inside-the-beltway think tank or a research institution. It's really coming from you. It's coming from people across the country at the front lines of this issue, from the field, those in education and law enforcement and juvenile justice and health, who really incorporating their perspectives on what constitutes a more effective approach to discipline. And there are a lot of examples about what different communities are coming up with. It's also consensus-based, and as I mentioned, it's something that people across the political spectrum agree on. And no matter if you're coming from the student's perspective or the classroom teacher's perspective or the law enforcement perspective, this really represents consensus across all those different groups. And finally, it's comprehensive. It's over 400 pages. It includes 60 recommendations and over 24 policy statements. And it doesn't just focus on conditions for learning or health issues, which are critical to this topic, but it also examines school-police partnerships and relationships between the juvenile justice system and the education system. And for these reasons, it's really unlike anything that's been put forward to date. The Consensus Project and the Consensus Report were made possible by a public-private partnership of funding, and as I mentioned, it was part of the Supportive School Discipline Initiative. So in order to actually come up with the recommendations, we engaged practitioners and policymakers at the front lines of this issue. So we had folks from education involved, obviously our partners that we highlighted today, AFT, NEA, NASSP, as well as others were involved. We had folks from the health community, law enforcement, and juvenile justice. In addition, we had researchers participate in our advisory group meetings and provide guidance to us. The advocacy community was very active in the project, as well as policymakers from states across the country. Youth and family also played a very strong role in this report, as youth are really the ones experiencing this on a day-to-day basis. And in addition, we conducted listening sessions around the country to further understand and integrate the perspectives of educators, community leaders, and youth and families into the project. So what we wanted to do now is talk a little bit about what's in the report, in the main sections of the report, and then also delve into some specific strategies that are highlighted in each chapter that are particularly relevant for educators, for administrators, for school-based staff, and school-based teams more broadly. And just to remind everyone, this is a really recent report that was released. It was a 3-year process. It came out in June of this year. So the first chapter focuses on conditions for learning and talking about how, as a primary way of preventing misbehavior, schools, districts, states need to prioritize school climate improvements and providing the necessary conditions for learning. So creating welcoming and supportive and safe learning environments where students feel that they're cared about and that they, and as a result, are less likely to act out. Educators are more equipped to handle conflicts before they escalate, and better able to manage student behavior. So to go through a couple of the recommendations that are included in the report, we start by measuring and tracking school climate data. And this includes examining school discipline data, school safety data, along with perception data from students, parents, staff members. And then engaging in conversations to talk about what the data reveals, what patterns might be emerging, and what needs to be done to address some of the issues that, that are seen in the data, whether it's disparities or large numbers of general suspensions or expulsions. The second area of focus of this chapter is based on that data, then using that to inform and develop a plan for improvement based on that data. So thinking about the different aspects of school climate, creating positive relationships, having engaging instruction, being clear on behavioral expectations, engaging families and communities in schools in a really legitimate and authentic way, and also kind of examining the school building to make sure that it's conducive for learning for all students. And then using data, again, to track progress over time to see if the strategies that are employed in that plan are really being effective. The third section focuses on codes of conduct and ensuring codes of conduct aren't just punitive and don't just include responses to misbehavior, consequences for misbehavior, but first that they outline expectations for appropriate behavior, that everyone's clear on how students and adults in the building are expected to act. That it secondly includes responses to misbehavior that are tailored to the severity of the offense, and that have the goal of keeping the student in school as much as possible, using a graduated system of responses, again, based on the severity of the offense. And third, that there's mechanisms in place to ensure that these disciplinary measures are consistently and properly implemented, so that there is consistency from classroom to classroom and from school to school and district to district. And finally, this chapter focuses on training and professional development for pre-service educators and current teachers and administrators for ensuring and helping to improve school climate, better manage classrooms, better connect with students in an effort to prevent, again, misbehavior from escalating into a bigger issue. And also using that information to inform continuous improvement so that educators and administrators and other school staff are constantly talking with others about effective strategies and using that information to better their own practice. And as you can see here, one of the strategies that we talked about, the Code of Conduct revisions in Baltimore, as a result of that, of revisions to the Code of Conduct, Baltimore saw a steep decline in overall suspensions over the past couple of years. However, they will agree, as will districts across the country, that disproportionality is still something that they need to be working on. And then we wanted to break the chapter down even further and provide and pull out specific strategies that might be useful for educators and administrators and school-based staff and school teams to improve school climate and conditions for learning. So one thing that we thought was really important as a starting point is to develop a vision for school climate that's shared among students, staff, families, and others, that there's buy-in to this broader vision of how we want our school to be, how we want to treat each other, what are those expectations, and how do we want the overall feeling of our school to be. A second really important strategy is the examination of data. So you don't know what you need to focus on until you know where you are. And so ensuring that school climate, discipline, and safety data are examined in tandem, and that this information is not only collected but also shared with important stakeholders to engage in collective conversations, to talk about trends and talk about areas for improvement. And then, based on those data, to use that information to inform priorities for school climate improvement and to figure out how those interact and intersect with other improvement plans in the school building. So, you know, the educators we've talked to have recognized that there are a ton of different improvement plans in the building. So there's plans for general school improvement, there's school safety plans, and a host of other documents that are out there. And so we're really advocating for schools and districts to really think about how those can be merged, because school climate and conditions for learning are really a fundamental part of ensuring academic success of students and keeping them engaged in learning. So how can they be built off one another and better integrated? We also think that, you know, another strategy that's really important is examining the Code of Conduct on a regular basis to ensure that it's consistent not only with the district code, but also with state regulations. And then again, it reflects a more restorative approach and a more graduated approach to responses to misbehavior that are focused on keeping kids in school. Obviously, there are going to be times where that's not possible, and we certainly recognize that. But whenever possible, figuring out ways to keep them in the classroom, and then going to that next point, creating on-campus options if it's not possible for a student to stay in the classroom because an argument or an issue has arisen that's gone too far, figuring out ways and on-campus options that are available to students where they can continue their studies, address their misconduct, think about what's underlying kind of some of their behavior, allow for a cooling off period, and providing them with some social and emotional and behavioral supports to then allow them to return to their classroom. And finally, thinking about professional development opportunities and ongoing support to help build educator skills in promoting positive climates and conditions for learning. And along what we heard from the field when we did a lot of these focus groups is the importance and need for educators and the desire for educators to really have opportunities to talk with peers and discuss strategies that are working and kind of troubleshoot situations that they might not have the answers to in isolation or on their own, and to really promote a sharing of best practices and kind of having a collaborative culture throughout the school is a really effective practice. So I'm going to turn it over to Nina to run us through the remaining chapters.
Great, thanks, Emily. So the next chapter that we focus on in the report is on targeted behavioral interventions. So even if you have a positive school climate and have the conditions for learning that Emily talked about in the previous chapter, there's still going to be some students that are going to need additional supports and interventions to keep them engaged in the classroom and out of the juvenile justice and school discipline systems. And so in this chapter, we talk about the systems and structures that schools and districts need to build in order to provide services and supports to those students with more intensive or more targeted behavioral health needs. And so to go through some of the recommendations that we include in this chapter, we again begin with looking and examining the data. And we talk about this in terms of examining the data at the student level as well as in the aggregate at the campus level. So at the student level, we talk about the use of early warning systems. We know a lot of districts and states around the country are beginning to use early warning systems primarily to support students in terms of their academics, keep them engaged and not drop out, or to improve graduation rates. But we feel that these early warning systems can also be used and expanded to support students with behavioral health needs and to identify kids early who may be at risk for the school discipline system. And so we talk about how these early warning systems can be used, what additional indicators should be added to an early warning system, such as strength-based factors or protective factors of students that can help identify kids but also use their strengths to better match interventions. At the aggregate, we talk about the need at a campus and district level to really examine the data through behavioral health surveys, school climate surveys, and other mechanisms to look at what the behavioral health needs of the entire student body are, so that you can better match the services that you provide and the supports that you provide and target those needs more effectively and allocate your resources according to those needs. So we talk about the supports that a district and a school principal can provide to school-based staff and educators around what supports and services are out there, who are partnering with the district currently to provide those services, what gaps exist, and how schools and the district can better fill in those gaps based on what those identified needs are through surveys and other data collection. We also talk about the need to build systems, both in school systems and then externally through partnerships. In the school, we talk about the use of student support teams, which we know is an increasing practice in districts around the country. And student support teams, we know that there's so many teams that schools currently use to support a number of initiatives in a school building. You have a school leadership team or a school improvement team. You have grade level and departmental teams. So we advocate for the use of student support team either as a team in isolation or building up upon a team that already exists in the school building to really identify those kids that have more intensive behavioral health needs, use the early warning system to help them do that, and then match and target interventions based on those identified needs. The student support teams can also help tracking the data and tracking progress of students and making any adjustments as necessary. And the student support team can also act as a conduit with IEP teams should those students need more supports that special education services can provide. We advocate that or encourage that student support teams be comprised not just of educators, but administrators and other specialized instructional support personnel like counselors or social workers and psychologists, as well as other adults inside the building and out of the building who work really closely with those youth. So based on the individual context of a youth's need, you may want to include other folks or other providers that are working really closely with that student. Externally, we talk about building a system of care approach. So we know that schools and districts around the country are experiencing severe budget cuts and budget constraints. We know that there's a severe shortage in the number of specialized instructional staff, psychologists, counselors, et cetera, in schools. And so there's a need to supplement the supports and services that schools are providing with external resources. So we talk about the need to build partnerships with external providers, community-based organizations, faith-based organizations, universities and hospitals, and other private healthcare providers to supplement those services. And in particular, for those students that have the most severe behavioral health needs, we know that they need more expertise and more supports from these external providers. The last part of this chapter focuses on alternative education. And so while we encourage, and the whole entire report encourages, using suspensions or expulsions or the removal of students from school as a last resort, we know there are going to be some students that would be more successful in another setting. And so we talk about the need to reform alternative education as it currently is, improve the quality of education in alternative settings, and particularly creating a system of multiple pathways, not just for those students who are removed from school for disciplinary reasons, but for all students who may not be successful in a traditional education setting. And so we make recommendations on how to improve the quality of those settings, from educator effectiveness and incentivizing teachers to teach in these settings, providing opportunities for career and technical education, as well as how the reentry process should look like for students who may want to return to a traditional education setting, and the use of transition coordinators or the need for credit recovery and so forth. And as you see on the right, we use Austin Independent School District as one example of a school that has implemented some of these practices. So Austin has an early child study system, which is a study team comprised of the folks that I mentioned earlier, educators, administrators, and so forth, who review early warning system data, look at the data, match interventions to those students, and track progress over time. And you can see that in the last couple of years, they've had a 29% reduction in the number of citations issued, which previously in Texas, you would issue citations for minor school-based offenses. So to go a little bit deeper into some of the strategies that we encourage in the report that are particularly applicable to school-based teams or educators and administrators and how they can use the recommendations. So we first talk about the data and using a data-driven process for identifying kids early who may need more intensive supports and interventions. So really knowing who those kids are and then using that data to match the most appropriate interventions, whether in school or through these external partnerships. Also using assessments, using behavioral health surveys or combining a behavioral health survey with a school climate perception survey for students and staff and families to not just identify the aggregate behavioral health needs of students, but also gather information about the quality and availability of health services in the school and in the community. Again, creating a student support team or building upon an already existing team that can really be responsible for this early identification and matching of interventions and tracking progress. Again, establishing partnerships with community organizations and other community resources to provide the whole range of intervention strategies that students in a school building may have. We talk in the report about the community schools models that a number of districts and states have begun implementing and for which research has shown promising results. And lastly, developing the systems and structures to support students who are in alternative settings who may want to transition back from an alternative education placement. And we'll talk a little bit more about this in the juvenile justice chapter because we make similar recommendations for those students who are in correctional facilities trying to re-enter back into a traditional environment as well. And as we go through these recommendations, I just want to make sure that folks know that in the report, we provide the recommendations, but we also provide hundreds of examples from the field, from school districts, from communities, from states around the country who have been implementing these practices and policies, and provide examples of how they've been able to make these changes. So there are concrete examples in the report that folks can look at. The next chapter in the report focuses on school-police partnerships. And so while we don't, advocate one way or another that schools should have a school-based officer or not, we know that this is the case in many communities across the country, particularly after the tragedy in Newtown a couple years ago. We know that the presence of officers on campus has increased. And so knowing this and recognizing this, we wanted to make recommendations on how to make those partnerships more effective. And what the roles and responsibilities of those officers should be, how they can best be trained, and so forth. And so some of the recommendations in the report, we begin by providing practitioners and policymakers with a data-driven tool that they can use to most effectively determine what type of partnership would work for their context. So the tool asks practitioners in the school to work with law enforcement agencies to review criminal incident data, school discipline data, and so forth, to really examine what's going on in a school building, determine what the needs are, identify goals, and then determine what the most appropriate partnership with a law enforcement agency would be, whether that's having a school-based officer on campus full-time or whether that's having an officer on call. There's various models that are out there that we summarize in the report of partnerships between schools and law enforcement agencies, and having an officer on campus is just one of those models. We talk a lot about the roles and responsibilities of officers on campus, that the role and responsibility should not be to monitor or be engaged in routine classroom management and to monitor the disciplinary system for minor offenses, but that officers on campus are really there to improve school safety and build positive relationships with youth. And we talk a lot about strategies that law enforcement officials, in partnership with school-based staff, can use to really minimize arrests in school and use other alternative strategies. We talk a lot about training for school-based officers and how training should really focus on working with youth, on youth development and adolescent brain development, de-escalation techniques, trauma-informed approaches. We talk about the effectiveness of cross-training, so having law enforcement officials being trained side by side with educators and other school-based staff. So there's consistency in messaging and communication and an understanding of the roles and responsibilities of officers, so everyone in the building really knows when and why and how those officers should be used. And lastly, we talk about the development of agreements or memorandums of understanding between school systems and law enforcement to really detail what the partnership should look like, detail how information sharing practices should be, detail the roles and responsibilities and supervision of the partnership. One example that we highlight here is the New Jersey Department of Law and Public Safety partnered with the Department of Education to develop a model MOU that districts across the state can use. Another one that's highlighted in the report and was publicized pretty well in the media last year was the intergovernmental agreement in Denver between the Denver Public School System and the police agency there, where they developed an MOU outlining the details of their partnership, the roles and responsibilities, and so forth. So just to give a few examples of strategies that we feel that schools can do or implement in partnership with law enforcement is to sit down with law enforcement closely, have educators and administrators and other school-based staff work with law enforcement to review the data, review criminal incident data, school discipline data, school climate surveys, and other information to determine the needs of the school regarding school safety, and then identify what goals they'd like to work towards and what police partnership makes the most sense for their context. We also encourage schools to work closely with local police agencies and the entire school community to clarify the role of school-based officers and their responsibilities, and particularly outline when school-based officers should be engaged in disciplinary matters and when it's not their role and responsibility, and encourage that these roles and responsibilities are communicated with school staff, with parents, with students, and other stakeholders, and articulate that in documents and in conversations. We then think that school-based staff and law enforcement can work together to continuously collect and review data to ensure that the policies and practices that are set forth in the MOU and in trying to reduce the use of suspensions and expulsions and arrests to make sure that these policies and practices are working. And lastly, to identify opportunities in a school building that can provide officers and other school-based staff the opportunity for cross-training on the issues that I identified before, on youth development, on de-escalation, on alternative to suspensions and expulsions, and so forth. So the last main chapter in the report is on courts and juvenile justice and the partnership between courts and juvenile justice and the education system. And so again, while we emphasize that removing students from school should be a last resort, we do recognize that there are some instances where students will be engaged in the juvenile justice system. And so we talk in this chapter obviously on the prevention side and how to reduce contact, but then also once students are in a correctional facility, how do we improve the educational quality of those facilities, and how do we improve the transition for students who are returning to their traditional education settings. So to go through some of these recommendations, first again, you'll see a pattern. We start with the data. We really think it's important that schools and juvenile justice systems are able to be able to talk about the data on school-based referrals to the juvenile justice system and share a common understanding of how many students are referred to the system from schools every year and for what offenses. And conversations that we've had around the country, it's very difficult to find a system or a state that is able to provide that kind of data at this time. Secondly, we talk about diversion and how schools and districts can partner with court systems to develop protocols and procedures and diversionary strategies to school-based or community-based supports to keep students out of the juvenile justice system for minor school-based offenses. Again, we talk about improving the quality of education in correctional facilities. We talk about how to incentivize teachers to teach in these facilities, the importance of the quality of educators, how they should be trained and prepared to teach in these facilities and work with students who are most at risk. We also talk about the need for the infusion of technology into these facilities and how technology can support and engage students in classroom activities and in learning. And lastly, we also talk about the need for more career and technical education curriculum to be infused in these facilities to support students once they leave the juvenile justice facility to really prepare them with the skills and training necessary for both post-secondary education and for career. And the last part of this chapter is on the other side of the system where we talk about youth who are leaving juvenile facilities and re-entering the community in the traditional education setting and how to really support their transition back to the community. And so just like in the alternative education section, we talk about the need for transition coordinators, both at the juvenile facility as well as in the traditional educational setting, and the need for transition coordinators to support students re-entering with credit transfers, with appropriate placement, and making sure that they receive the necessary behavioral health, academic, and other support that they need, both in the facility and once they transition back into the regular education setting. And you can see on the right-hand side of the slide, in Clayton County, Georgia, we have an example there of Judge Teskey, who's worked really, really hard on these issues and established a collaborative there with clear protocols for how school discipline cases are referred to court. And you can see the steep decline that they've seen in school-related offenses being referred to the court system since this initiative started. So just to go through these again, what we feel like schools can do in partnership with the juvenile justice system, tracking the data about the number of students and the characteristics of students who are referred to the juvenile justice system from schools, creating partnerships with courts to identify diversion options both in the community and in the school for youth that are referred for minor behavior issues, work with the juvenile court system with probation staff and others to determine placement and ensure credits transfer and so forth for students that are re-entering, and designating a transition coordinator, whether that's a new position or already someone on staff who can fulfill that role, to ensure that services are integrated for students who are re-entering and that they have a clear academic plan for when they go back to their traditional setting. We have two other short chapters of the report, which we say are cross-cutting themes that run, kind of across the four headings that we talked about before. One is information sharing, and so we know that we talk about a lot of different stakeholders and actors working with students and the sharing of student information, and that there's a lot of federal laws and state laws that apply to the sharing of student-level information. And so we provide an analysis of FERPA and HIPAA and other applicable federal laws, as well as case scenarios and other resources for the appropriate sharing of student-level information. So when an education person can share student-level information with behavioral health practitioners, when a school-based officer can share information with educators and so forth, and we provide different case scenarios for how that can happen. Another cross-cutting theme that we talk a lot about is data collection, which I mentioned, and I think Emily mentioned in her chapter as well. So we talk about the need to collect student-level information and campus-level information. We also talk about the need for state-level information to be collected on school discipline and school climate, and make sure that definitions for disciplinary data are standardized within each state so that we can ensure the consistent application of these definitions, better collect the data, and track this over time. And we also talk about the need to collect and publicly report school discipline information annually in a way that's accessible and user-friendly, to look at school discipline data and other related data like school climate and behavioral health to identify existing needs and inform strategic planning and decision-making, as well as resource allocation over time and track that progress. And we provide a number of examples of states who are leading the country right now in collection and reporting of disciplinary data, including Virginia, Wisconsin, and Maryland, and you can find more information about that in the report. So to quickly go through this section, we know that the report is very comprehensive. It's over 400 pages and 60 recommendations, and so we wanted to talk quickly about how to get started. We get this question a lot. There's so much information, we don't know where to begin. So first, we advocate for folks to assemble the key stakeholders, just like we did with the consensus process, to assemble the necessary stakeholders that are committed to addressing these issues. That's in a school building using existing team structures like the school leadership or school improvement team, and involving other folks from other public agencies and community leaders, including parents and students themselves, to talk about the issues and examine the data. Looking at trends, looking at disparities, looking at all the different data that we've identified throughout the report on school discipline, on climate, on criminal incidents, and so forth. After examining the data, we think that these groups can come together to identify goals based on the data, identify the greatest needs within the school, and match that to the available resources, whether that's addressing disproportionality, supporting students that have more intensive behavioral health needs, focusing on a particular school climate improvement strategy, but all of these goals should really tie back to the data. And then developing an action plan to map out those strategies for how to achieve short and long-term goals, integrating that within existing improvement plans in a school and in a district, and continuing to collect and look at data over time to determine if progress in implementing those new policies and practices are being made. So again, I know we went through this report really quickly. If you want to look at the entire report, it's available on our website along with an executive summary. We also have an implementation checklist for school district superintendents that parallels the recommendations in the report. Before we go to questions, we also have another presenter, Principal Killian Betlach, who's here from Elmhurst Community Prep in Oakland, California. We know that Oakland Unified School District has done a lot of impressive work over the last several years around school discipline and around school climate, especially around restorative justice. And really appreciative that he's taken time away from his duties as a principal in a school building to share with us the strategies and the results of the work that he has done in his school building to really examine these issues. So, Killian, I turn it to you.
Thanks, Nina. Appreciate it. Greetings, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Killian Betlach. I'm the principal of Elmhurst Community Prep Middle School in the Oakland Unified School District. It's really an honor to be here today to talk about what is obviously a nationwide discussion, something that's really critical, important, and cuts to the heart of what it means to be an educator in a lot of our schools, particularly those located in urban contexts and serving low-income youth and youth of color. So it's really a great opportunity to be here. Nina, I just wanted to ask, are my slides showing so I can rock on, or what's the next thing here?
Yes. I can move the slides for you if that works.
Nice. Let's hit my first slide.
Okay.
All right, so this is just an overview of our school. We're located in Deep East Oakland. We serve a school community that's almost 100% young people of color and almost 100% low income. I think that the few percentage points away from 100 are folks not filling out forms. Just in the context of kind of how we're located and how we're situated in the work. Our next slide, introduced with some data, speaks to just some of the work that we've been doing around external suspensions or out-of-school suspensions. The green bar represents the suspensions for all the middle schools that are located in the Oakland Unified School District. The red bar are the East Oakland middle schools, the ones that are also sometimes labeled as flatland middle schools, and the blue bar is us. And so what we see is a pretty substantial reduction in suspensions, both from our district and the overall middle schools, but then also just our school taking really big steps in being able to keep more kids in school more often, in class, learning, and being able to avoid this very kind of traditional and unhelpful consequence, right? We see 5.6% represents a lot of growth, still too high for us. If we broke that number down a little bit, on our next slide, I hope folks can see this. I just wanted to show some faces because, data is one thing, but faces are another. That's my lunch crew. We mob at lunch sometimes. It's fun. We had a 52% reduction in suspensions overall. We had a 51% reduction in suspensions for African American students, and we had a 32% reduction for African American male students. And so one of the things that's really key in that is that we're doing this work not by not impacting our African American population at our school, but in particular by serving them better and improving outcomes for them. And that's a really key part of this work and a key part of calling out outcomes for a group of young people that has not always been well served historically in our system. The other thing I want to just reference, if I can go back just real quick, that we've also nearly reduced all disproportionality in our external suspension. So we are kind of within a statistically significant range for all of our student groups, including African American males, Latino or Raza students with disabilities. Last year we saw just an elimination of disproportionality there, something that we're very proud of. The other thing that we're looking at is the amount of time that kids, even if they're in school, how much time are they spending out of class? You see, these are our out-of-class referrals. The number's really high still for a school with just about 400 students, but again, seeing really substantial reductions in the number of out-of-class referrals, and again, particularly seeing that growth in part because we're serving our African American students better, and seeing that those referrals drop for that group of kids. And so the highlights from there that we see on the next slide is just a 21% reduction in total referrals and a 22% reduction in African American referrals. A few years ago, African American students represented about 30% of our school and almost 85% of our out-of-classroom referrals. And it's an unacceptable condition that we've worked hard to rectify. We're not yet there. There's more work to be done. But we have to. But we're heading in the right direction. And so I think like whenever as an educator and as folks that are trying to impact the work of schools, it's one thing to look at data and numbers, and it's another thing to say like how did this happen and kind of what's the work, right, that goes into it. So I tried to offer that in the next slide around the RTI pyramid. And I don't know if anyone's ever like made an RTI pyramid on their computers, whatever. It's really hard to type into a triangle. So if you'll forgive some of the lack of alignment there, but the thing that I just kind of want to first call out with the RTI pyramid is just the words the ECP family that exist on the left-hand side there. ECP stands for Elmhurst Community Prep, our school. And one of the things that we started doing is just saying, this is the ECP family. It's not a school. It's a school second. It's a family first. We're going to spend 8 to 10 to 12 hours a day together, and we need to understand ourselves that way. And I led that work as the principal, and by using that language, gave other adults permission to use that language, and gave blueprints for the kids, because they're in middle school and they're not a family. Oh, yes, we are, and we're going to have good times as a family. We're going to celebrate as a family. We're going to have some hard times where we're going to need to mourn and heal as a family, but we're going to do it that way and through that lens. And I think that really changes the way the kids and the adults in the system can start to experience school. In thinking about how do we improve and how do we get better outcomes for young people, we really have put a lot of work into just kind of that first tier of the pyramid, and on this, the behavioral or socio-emotional stuff's on the left-hand side and the academic on the right. And so really trying to say, like, our tier 1 needs to be really big. Like, our tier 1 and the kind of stuff that all kids get can't just be, the 4 classes and PE and line it up and play, because we've been running that game and that kind of simulation for years. We know what the outcomes are, and they're unacceptable. We have to start to juggle and do more with what we're offering young people. So we start with extended learning time, so all of our young people go to school an additional 12 hours a week, which is a big deal for a public middle school in a district context, but we'd be able to make it work and be able to offer that to families. We've seen our enrollment go up and our chronic absence decline in the context of an extended school day. Very excited about that. And so that exists on both sides of the pyramid, because it both is serving enrichment needs that unfortunately we find it really hard to serve in a traditional school setting with the budget realities where they are. And it exists on the academic side because of the academic supports that are provided to young people in that context. On the academic side, just pushing on that a little bit more, we offer an acceleration program that is additional academic courses for all students exactly where they need those courses to be. So for some young people, that means that they're reading books and doing math that they wouldn't see till sophomore year of high school. For other people, it means we're doing word work and we're getting our multiplications learned, because, that just has to happen. And to support that, we've been writing grants, participating in programs, allocating funds, fundraising, scraping, clawing, and doing everything we can to bring a blended learning pedagogy to kids, because we believe that a lot of the root causes of discipline and of kids not meeting, not following expectations of school, or that they feel disconnected from the work, and that the work, they spend a lot of time, kids in urban contexts spend a ton of time with work that is either way too easy or way too hard for them and not meeting where they need. And we've seen that when we brought a blended learning pedagogy to our entire 8th grade last year, we saw a huge reduction in referrals, actually larger than the whole school-wide reduction. And the theory there is that kids are just spending more time getting what they need academically from class time, and so there's less of a need to seek other maladaptive behaviors. In that context, we offer a real commitment to what some of folks call restorative justice, what we call restorative discipline. We feel like that title's a little more appropriate for a school setting. And the idea being that just really starting to shift the conversation when young people are removed from a class or need to have a conversation before they can return, away from what's the punishment to what is the harm restoration. And that's restorative justice 101. But we've really committed to it, even some folks that may have been skeptical around, and it's changed the culture of those conversations. And kids used to come into my office not too long ago, and they come in cussing out a teacher, I'm never going back, you can't make me, I'm not going to that class ever again. And our conversation with some of the same young people and the same teachers are now, I said, what do you think needs to happen to make this right? And the conversation I get is I probably should apologize. And both like to the teacher, to the kid who was harmed, to the whole class, to the grade level. And that type of shift is profound. And it very much changes how we understand how we re-engage after there's harm done to our expectations, harms done to our norms, harms done to our school community. The other thing I just highlight on Tier 1 is the facilities upgrade, and this is just one of those things. A lot of schools situated in urban context, and in low-income areas, when the school looks like garbage and the building's not welcoming and things are broken, it's a real disincentive to push yourself to do the right thing if you're a young person. And I've been pushing, and our districts responded with new paint on the outside, new play yards for kids, and that's a huge part of this work. It's the data and things like that work too, but if we're constantly sending kids to school to be in places that are not healthy for human beings, you're going to not get kids at their best. The other, just two things I just want to bring up here is some caseload work that's mentioned there. We've really tried to, I think that in this pyramid, a lot of stuff goes to tier 3 right away at a lot of places. Like the kid's struggling, give them a counselor, and those resources are very rare and very dear, and they get used up. And so what we've tried to do is think through how do we get more tier 2 resources. And so some of our folks on our leadership team have taken on caseloads with kids that are just outside the sphere of success, looking at both sides of the pyramid for them. How can we support them with their grades? How can we support them with their behavior and emotionally? How can we engage families better? And that type of a commitment to preventative work has really saved us a lot of time and energy on the back end. And on the academic side, doing that through the lens of focal students and saying, in the groups that we care about, who are some kids that represent larger student groups? How can we get to know them better? How can we understand both their family situation, their school situation, their experiences in elementary school, their hopes and dreams, and how can we work with them better to meet their needs and help them reach their success? And so that type of personalization, which is, I think, a theme throughout the pyramid here, is one of the things that has allowed us to continue to do some good work. Not where we need to be by any stretch, but I think on the right path, and hopefully continuing to grow and improve.
Great. Thank you so much, Julian. That's so helpful to have an on-the-ground perspective of what this really looks like at the school level. And it sounds like you all are doing such an amazing job there, and really appreciate you taking the time out to talk to us today. What we wanted to do now is to open it up for questions. I know we don't have a lot of time, but we want to try to engage in a thoughtful conversation with all the presenters and participants on the webinar today. Just a reminder, if you have questions, you can enter them into the Q&A box, and we can do our best to answer as many as possible. But what we thought while folks are entering their questions in, one question that we wanted to throw out to the group as an initial question is around the use of data. So as Nina mentioned, and as you could see is very clear in the report chapters, data is a critical component, and we really see it as one of the fundamental things that is necessary to get started on any sort of school discipline reform, any sort of school climate improvement, is to really collect and analyze and examine and report out data. And so would be really curious to hear from you all about the types of how school discipline and climate data is used in your school, and how you think it might be better used to help inform improvement efforts.
I'm sorry, was that to me?
Sure, yeah. If you could provide a quick response, and then we can kind of get to some of the questions in the queue.
Sure. I mean, one of the things that we've been looking at is it's hard to, we want to be more data driven, and we're still lacking the resources to do that well. And we're tracking data of out of class time for kids on Google Docs, and that's not ideal. And there are much better ways to make that happen. But when we committed to doing that, we got a much fuller picture of some of the issues. Like I quoted a number that African American young people represented a huge proportion of our out-of-class referrals. We didn't know that until we started tracking it. It wasn't something that was necessarily immediately apparent, although perhaps it should have been. And that allowed us to get at this and to really start understanding where our data was, and then also to find out what are the type of things kids are being sent out for. And let's get a handle on tapping on the desk referrals. That's not okay. We can handle that in class. Here's some strategies to do it. Let's get a handle on we started to see some time things that kids in the third hour of school were disproportionately having lots of out-of-class referrals. So we built in a 15-minute break after the second hour of class to give kids time to get some water, eat a piece of fruit, talk to a teacher, run around, play tetherball, and then brought them back in. And that time period is no longer the place where we see lots of referrals come from, because we had that kind of socio-emotional reset. So those are some of the ways that just like allow us to interrogate our systems and be able to maintain some focus on things. And then we built leadership teams around system maintenance when it comes to that in data analysis.
Great, thank you. No, that's really interesting. I mean, I know a lot of school-based teams are in the process of, you know, starting to collect data and think about the use of that data, particularly to inform decision-making. You know, in addition to this RTI pyramid that you provided, I think one of the things that we were hoping to focus on this webinar is the role of school-based teams and the fact that school discipline and climate issues aren't the responsibility of one person in the building. You know, school climate isn't just the principal's responsibility. It's not just the teacher's responsibility. It's really a collective effort. And was wondering if you might be able to speak to how you've tried to engage all different types of staff, and that includes you know, bus drivers and school-based officers if they're in your school, and trying to bring everybody together so they feel that they're, I guess, a part of this, and how do you ensure their buy-in to what you want to do and the changes that you want to make and the vision you have for your school?
Sure, yeah. We start with grade level teams, and those are all the teachers that teach the 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade, and the charge there is both around some preventative work with kids, early intervention, and making sure that our common practices and programs are aligned. Because when and I'm seeing questions on PBIS, which I think is a great program, and we've tried to kind of steal the PBIS meat without necessarily, I don't know, getting into all of the PBIS stuff. That's an awful lot of meetings. But that's what a lot of our teachers are doing and kind of what we're leading towards. So grade level teams is the start, as well as kind of ensuring that we have common practices, right? Like if a kid's going to, what it means to get a reflection or what's okay and not okay has to be the same classroom to classroom, because there's no way a 12-year-old's going to be able to figure that out otherwise. And if we're not as adults doing that work, we're setting kids up for failure. So it starts with grade level teams. We have a what we call the PAPS team, with a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but Positive Action Behavior Support Team, and they're at a high level of like system maintenance. How's our progressive discipline system doing? How's our administrator on deck system? Our supervision plans, times when certain people are in certain places. They look at that from a top level. Then we have two other teams that really get at kind of the heart of this work. Our students and staff team, SAS. We really like clever acronyms. SAS is doing the nitty-gritty of school culture. And it's kids and teachers and other staff working together to do things like plan the dance or decide what should be sold in the student store, to think about how student government plays a role and to give students a voice in things. So that's another team that's really critical. And then we have our coordination of services team. And that team includes our clinicians, our counselors, our restorative discipline folks, myself, community service, full service community schools managers, as well as some other providers, the nurse, the director of our school-based health clinic. And that's around getting at, again, how can we coordinate services for kids, and how do we make sure that we are not, with really limited adult resources, how can we get the biggest bang for the buck? Does this kid really need a Tier 3 counselor? Can we get him Tier 2? Can we refer out? Who needs a mentor? How do we get that, kind of rolling in a really positive way? And I think you spoke to buy-in, and I think that, what we say is, I know this is a national call, and I recognize, I think there's a lot of folks on the East Coast. Oakland's tough country, and it's a hard place to be an educator. And so one of the things that we talk about, we look for this type of mindset, a restorative mindset, a collaborative mindset in everyone we hire, because you can't do the work otherwise. And we talk about this needing to be just where everyone has to start, because we will not find success without it. And we look for that in folks, and we cultivate it, and we celebrate it and recognize it, because without it, we're not going to be successful. And I think, and there's enough, once the ball got rolling, folks see that when we're in this relationship with each other, and then when we're in this relationship with kids, we're going to have better results.
Definitely. No, that's really helpful. And just to circle back to that question we had gotten about PBIS, that's definitely one of the strategies, and we talk about that in the consensus report, and recognize that a growing number of districts and schools and states even are really pushing forward with PBIS as a kind of framework for improving school climate. You know, one of the things that we found through our research, through our discussions with folks on the ground and researchers as well, is, you know, the importance of embedding PBIS in a larger school climate improvement framework, that's one component of it, similar to RTI, but that, you know, it needs to be coupled with data collection, with code of conduct revisions, with a lot of other policy and practice efforts, and that alone, you know, while a very, you know, promising program, or not even program, but framework, can't alone necessarily address a lot of the issues that we're seeing in schools today, and particularly, you know, around disproportionality and ensuring students of color, students with disabilities, LGBTQ youth, and so on, aren't being disproportionately suspended and expelled. Another question that I saw was talking about the importance of data disaggregation in a more complex way. You know, I know in your slides, Killian, you talked about the reductions that you've seen by you know, African American students, but are you working to collect data and examine disaggregated data by race, ethnicity, and gender, or including SES or special education status or some of the other kind of student characteristics, to see if there are certain, you know, specific student populations that are being disciplined more often than others?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think, you know, for us, SES is the entire school, and young people of color is the whole school. I called out African American data in particular because for us, that was the group of young people that had been most poorly served by our systems. And so that was the group that, as a school, we said we really need to think about how we're working with those young people in particular. And I think, you know, contextually, you know, one of the most humbling moments that I've had as a leader was to sit in my office and with a kid, a mom, and a grandma, and for them all to talk about having come to that exact same office because they all attended our school to get suspended. And just thinking about like really like, wow, like is this the kind of system that I want to replicate, and is this the kind of multi-generational failure of a school to serve a community, what I want to be a part in and what I want our teams to be part of? So we collect all those data on all kids, and just again calling out African American young people because those are the kids that for whom the data was most stark and for whom the system was doing the poorest job serving. I do want to just say again, like a lot of this right now, like we're doing on the cheap with a lot of kind of human sweat. There's a lot of ways to do this a lot better. And when districts across this country like invest or continue to invest in the data systems that are interactive, that are multifaceted, that are connected in states where it's allowed legally, connected to like the juvenile justice system and the foster youth system, we're going to be able to have better results for kids. Like we're really constrained by often like, you know, the amount of data entry that people whose job is not data entry are able to do into our Google Docs because of the lack of a system that allows us to run the kind of reports we want to run and really look at all the factors you named, right? Race, ethnicity, gender, LGBTQ identification, students with disabilities, et cetera.
Great, thank you. One question that I wanted to throw out to all the participants on the webinar, and maybe you can either chat us back or enter your responses in the Q&A box. But you know, one of the things that we're really interested here, following up on the report release and these webinars, is really thinking about what tools and resources would be of greatest interest and most helpful to practitioners who are really at the ground level, who are on the front lines of this issue. As Nina mentioned, we developed a checklist for district administrators, but would really love your thoughts on how we can distill some of the information in this large, comprehensive, consensus-based report to you all coming to the forefront as educators, as administrators, as school staff, and you know, in your other roles, what might be the most helpful for you. That would be really of greatest interest, or of great interest to us. So I think we have a time for a couple more questions. So Killian, one thing that we also mentioned is helping to support students transition, you know, recognizing that we're doing our best to keep kids in the classroom or in school. What kind of supports and services do you all have for students who are returning either from long-term suspension or from the juvenile justice systems, or how do you think supports for those students might be improved?
We've been developing a protocol that we follow for when kids are coming back from an out-of-school suspension, or you know, one of the things that we experience a lot of is kids that have gone to various charter schools and have been removed from those charter environments. And you know, they don't use words like expulsion, but I think that the effect on a young person and his family are often the same. So developing a protocol that involves welcoming the young person to the school, having a formal welcome circle with them and their family, being able to talk forthrightly and frankly about some of the challenges that they've had prior to coming to the school, identifying for them a point person, whether it's a lead teacher or a counselor, assistant principal, myself, for that young person to connect to, and scheduling some check-ins with them so that they're able to know that they're going to be supported in this way. We, on an even more systematic basis, we often have an experience where we'll get about 10% of our 8th grade will be new and each year, and kids that weren't from 7th or 6th grade, and those kids are often on their 4th or 5th or 3rd middle school of their 3-year career. And so we've also built in for them programs and classes where we've repurposed an advisory class or repurposed an academic intervention class to just be about school acculturation and goal setting, so that kids are not just thrown into you know, the 32-to-1 student-to-teacher classroom ratio and just asked to kind of swim. And again, that came from data too. That came from data and looking at, like, wow, okay, so the kids that we're having all these discipline issues with are often kids that didn't come to us in 6th grade, that came to us after not having success in other contexts. So that I mean, that's kind of like a you know, a high-level approach, but a lot of it, the principle, I think, though, is committing the time for recognition and personalization and building the relationship.
Great. No, that's really good advice. So I believe we have come to the end of our time here, and just wanted to, first of all, thank all of our speakers, and thank you, Killian, for taking the time and for all of your helpful insight. I wanted to let everyone on the webinar know that we are holding another webinar on October 8th that will be geared towards juvenile justice officials, the juvenile justice field, and reentry field. So please check out our website, csgjusticecenter.org, for more information about that. We hope you will also sign up for our youth news alerts with information about school discipline, about the Consensus Project, and about other youth-related activities also on our website. So again, at this time, really want to just thank everyone and thank you all for participating, and hope you have a wonderful rest of the afternoon.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm responding to you.